But different people express their love in different ways. How do we communicate our love language to each other? How do you show another you love them? And is the way that you show have meaning for you or meaning for them? And so he's based his work on 5 main love languages. And we need to put that context of love in biblical terms, if you like, faith, hope and love, and the greatest of these is love. We're talking about that sort of love that Jesus shows us when he gave up his life on the cross for us. But actually in our relationships, we show love to each other in a whole variety of different ways. Sometimes we can be confused by this word. A man involved in an adulterous relationship calls it love. The pastor might call it sin. The wife of an alcoholic picks up the pieces after her husband's last episode. She calls it love. Psychologist calls it codependency. Parents indulging their children's every whim, calling it love. Think of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The family therapist calls it irresponsible parenting. So here we're talking about that sort of love that is not of that sort. And love is essential to our basic emotional needs. And if in childhood we don't experience that kind of unconditional love, we have to learn about it later, and our formation can be damaged or wounded as a consequence. And he's American, so this chap, Gary Chapman, so he talks about, how can I fill up your love tank, which might not be kind of an expression we might use. But the 5 love languages that he talks about, and I'm going to take one for each day, are acts of service, quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch, and gifts, receiving and giving. I'm going to talk more today, or most today, about acts of service. But that's when we kind of show our love for somebody by, my husband is an acts of service. That's how he shows his love for people. So, teenagers turn up with a dirty car at age 19 or whatever. He goes out and says, "Oh, lovely to see you," and washes the car, which is his way of saying, "I'm really thrilled to see you, it's lovely to have you home." But if that's not their love language, then, why is Dad washing my car? Why isn't he spending time with me, or giving me a present, or telling me how amazing I am, kind of thing. So that's how these miscommunications can happen. Quality time, briefly, I'll be doing these later on, is if your love language is actually sitting and having a conversation, or sitting in silence with somebody, or going for a walk with somebody, and you may only have 3 sentences, but at the end of it you really know that they love you, then that's your love language. If words of affirmation are your love language, if you really, and some say, "Oh, this is such fabulous supper, Sarah, thank you so much." And, for some people it might just go whoosh over the head, well, yeah, it was okay. Whereas for others, they would really take that in and know that person's saying, "I really appreciate what you've done and how you've cooked this, and I really appreciate you and I love you," kind of in that word of affirmation. You did that really well, or "I'm so proud of you." Physical touch is obvious, but for some people, we're talking here about being touched rather than having sex or intercourse or any sexual encounter. And for some people, COVID really was difficult for them, because we didn't touch anybody unless they were in your bubble. And coming back into church and not passing the peace was really tricky. Because actually, if physical touch is your love language, you want to embrace people. You want to say, you know, the peace of the Lord be with you. And by touching them, it's far more than the words, because that's your love language that you receive or that you give. And then the last one, receiving gifts. I think I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the number of times my husband's bought me flowers. Am I bothered? 40 plus years of being married? Not one jot. But I know for some of my friends, it's a really important kind of encounter that they've bothered. And you know, it can be a bunch of, it doesn't matter the cost. The cost it's not about the cost, it's about receiving the gift. You know, whether it's a £1 bunch of daffodils or a £20 bouquet. It's about, you know, in doing that, I know I'm loved because they've given me this gift. So those are the sort of a brief kind of override of what we're going to be looking at this week. And in terms of acts of service, the Bible is full of them. But if we think about the Israelites leaving slavery and going towards the promised land, and all the time it took them, there are a whole load of acts of service that we can remember that God did in that period of time, whether it's, you know, stretching out his hand over the sea and driving the sea back, as it were, to providing them with food and water and making the bitter water taste okay, and it goes on and on and on. So that's part of Jesus' history that he lived within from his birth. He would have known all about that mighty acts of God and those acts of service throughout his history. And then if we think about Jesus and perhaps his acts of service, again, there are plenty of them. I'm going to read today the John version of the feeding of the 5,000, because actually I may read it again when we do gifts, and you'll see why in a minute. So Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and a large crowd kept following him, because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" Jesus said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. It's a very clear act of service, feeding hungry people who'd followed him in a kind of quite extraordinary sort of way. And I've chosen the John version because we get also the gifts, this boy with his picnic. And out of that picnic that he'd been sent off with his mum, all those people were fed. No gift that we give to God is too small. God can do miraculous things with whatever we give. But in terms of the acts of service, Jesus was very focused about, okay, we've got this, we've got all these people to feed, you know, go and buy something, you won't get enough food, you haven't got enough money, so we will actually bless and break and share And it went on and on and on. And it's just a lovely story, I think, and that sense of serving others at their time of need. And I suppose if we're going to think about modern day people, Mother Teresa's love language is definitely acts of service. And she says this: I invite all those who appreciate our work to look around them and be willing to love those who have no love and to offer them their services. I mean, this is a perfect quote, isn't it? Perfect quote for this theme. I'm just going to read that one again. I invite all those who appreciate our work to look around them and be willing to love those who have no love and to offer them their services. And she goes on to say, are we not, by definition, messengers of love? Money is not everything. The poor need the work of our hands and the love of our hearts. I'm sure you will be able to think of people that you know in your family, in your relationships, in church, whose love language is acts of service. And as I was watching my toast being made, as I had breakfast this morning, and I was the only one there for breakfast, having come last night, and I looked at the staff team here, and I'm going to look at Esther at this point. I looked at the staff team here, and I thought, actually, their love language is acts of service. That's why some of them have been here so long, because it must be related to, I want to show that I love God. I want to show the love of God. I will do this as okay. I get paid for it, but they're always doing extra. They're always doing extra. But there's that sense of that's a love language that's very clearly in front of us. Just have an observation today when you're around the place, whether it's the gardeners or the Mainty men or all the people that we don't see sometimes. There they are, sharing that. And if your love language is acts of service, beginning to understand that about yourself will help you discern what God is calling you to, but also will help you discern how maybe you sharing that with others doesn't mean very much to them. Why don't you say thank you kind of thing, or, why don't you appreciate this, or whatever. Because they don't see it as a statement of you saying, what you think you're doing this big, wide open, I love you, I've done all the washing up, I've done the gardening today, I've cleared the cupboards, I've washed the car, whatever. I'm saying I love you without saying those words. And you're thinking, I'd much rather he'd bought me flowers, or I'd much rather she'd done this, or I'd much rather we'd done, whatever. So understanding our own love language and those and others will really help us in our relationships. And if we can, I remember in a parish when somebody said to me, Sarah, it really irritates me when this isn't all, it was the altar, talking about the altar, isn't all set up straight and everything. And I said, well, Ian, go ahead, change it. And he said, but am I allowed to? And I said, it would be a great act, and I said it without thinking, it would be a great act of service to all of us, because there will be other people who are irritated by the fact that it's slightly squiff, and sitting there thinking, oh, that's not straight. So it's also about encouraging us to use each other's acts of service. And if your love language is acts of service, God will speak to you in that kind of way. Because God's love language is all-embracing and can speak to us in any kind of a way. But if your love language is acts of service, that's when you will know that God's trying to get your attention. That's when you'll know that, he's calling you into something, or he's trying to show you something afresh. And it will, you know, I think it helps our relationships both with each other and with our faith journey, because there's an understanding of, okay, I need to do this, and I need to recognise that when I'm doing this, you know, when I'm you know, being in church doing the sound system or handing out the books, actually I'm blessing people as they arrive. That's part of what I'm doing. And they may not see that as a love language or an act of service, but actually I know that's what I'm doing. And then it sort of, it just encapsulates the love that you're trying to share with others, because you've got an understanding of what's happening for you.